Eimear Ryan. I'm delighted to be introducing Wendy Erskine and John MacKenna. Wendy Erskine will be our first reader tonight. Her first collection, Sweet Home, has just been published by the Stingfly Press. Her work has also appeared in Female Lines, new writing by women from Northern Ireland, published by New Island, and is forthcoming in Winter Papers, BBC Radio 4, and in the new Faber anthology, Being Various, New Irish Short Stories, edited by Lucy Caldwell. Sweet Home is a brilliant debut, one of my favourite books of 2018, and I'm sure it will become many of yours. As writer Gavin Corbett says of its 10 stories, they go down easy, but soon your head starts to pitch and you realise you've been hit with a wallop. As readers, we're told very little up front in Erskine's stories. Instead, we get to bed down with the characters in the compelling mess of their lives and figure out what's happening right alongside them. Erskine's wry humour is threaded throughout, never better than in the exquisite bickering of her married couples. Sweet Home is set in East Belfast, and yes, there is a shivering undercurrent of trauma and violence filtered through the characters' determination to get on with things. A well-to-do architect who has lived on the mainland for years gets dinner party mileage out of a long-ago bomb scare. A woman working as a fortune teller is told that there's no demand for loyalist psychic readings, too niche apparently. Throughout, Erskine is alert to the absurdity and tragedy, how people can shift from banal to profound, empathetic to glib. A dead child inspires thoughts of online tributes and candle emojis. A beautician wonders one moment about the scars on her clients' bodies, and the next mentally calculates her pay per second. The villain of the first act can turn out to be the protagonist of the second. Erskine's eye is shrewd, empathetic, and never sentimental. Stories that you expect to wind down to a gentle, lyrical close can take a sharp, often disturbing turn. Perhaps most remarkably, Erskine shows us what women, especially older women, are really capable of, the strength of their desires, and what they're willing to do in pursuit of them. Our second reader tonight is John MacKenna. John's most recent short story collection is Once We Sang Like Other Men, published in 2017 by New Island. He's the author of 18 books in all, spanning novels, short stories, memoir, biography, and poetry. He's also a playwright and documentary filmmaker. He's a winner of the Hennessy, Irish Times, and Cecil Day Lewis Awards, and teaches creative writing at NUI Maynooth. Once We Sang Like Other Men is an ambitious and visceral collection of linked stories, charting the fates of 12 disciples after the death of their charismatic leader, the captain. Frightened and disaffected, the disciples retreat into obscurity, trying to find meaning after their spiritual leader has been murdered by the state. This collection is full of startling moments, exploring the unexpected tenderness of male friendship, as well as the urgency and strangeness of confronting one's own mortality. Though their names are familiar, these aren't the apostles you've heard about in school. There's fishermen among them, yes, but also writers, musicians, barmen, and used car salesmen. Meanwhile, the mysterious and deeply ambiguous captain, with his failed folk singing career and cult-like group of followers, evokes Charles Manson as much as he does Jesus Christ. Throughout the book, the characters are frustrated by the mythology and fake news that has built up around their leader. I've read the stories, veiled and half-veiled, the rumours and the accusations, says one. He wasn't there, says another. He has bits of the story. He adds bits, he spins it. Like a kaleidoscope, each character has a different take, a different piece of the puzzle. In the end, there's a sense that it's impossible to fully capture that which is most meaningful. One character chides himself for remembering his brother, for trying to slot emotion into pockets. But it's this attempt to keep the past alive that makes these characters so compelling. So please join me in welcoming Wendy Erskine and John MacKenna. I've been reading both of your wonderful collections the last few weeks, and I know when I get a new book, one of the first things I do is I flip to the acknowledgements page, because I think it can often be a really good insight into the making of a book. And Wendy, one of the first people you thanked was the writer Sean O'Reilly, whose workshop you participated in. So I wonder if you could talk a bit about your experience in the workshop and how the stories came about.
Yes, certainly. Prior to the workshop, I had basically written practically nothing. In the 1990s, early 90s, I tried to write a novel and it was absolutely appalling. I sent it off to a few places and whenever it got rejected, I was kind of like, yes, I know it's terrible, isn't it? I agree with you, awful. So there was no kind of belief in that whatsoever. And then the only other thing, I'd once written one story and sent it off to one competition where it didn't win anything. And it was obvious it wasn't going to win anything because it was a women's magazine and mine was based in a Paul Reagan painting to do with it was about girls murdering a man. So it was never ever going to happen in this romantic life. So basically what happened was I was going to have one afternoon a week off work. I work full-time as a teacher. And I wanted to do something with it beyond just loafing about, mooching around, which I do really enjoy doing also. And I kind of thought, what would do? Will I volunteer somewhere? What will I do? And I saw online the 6-month Stay and Fly workshop. Applied for that. Wrote a story to try to get on it, and got on it, and then went down to Dublin every Monday night for six months. And it was just wonderful. It was absolutely an exhilarating experience. It says I'm going to pay to say this or not. I mean, it was genuinely absolutely incredible. So interesting. I mean, I studied English at university, so I'd spent really all my adult life reading books or thinking about books. But I really had never thought about it in this more profound way, really, until I did this workshop. And it was enjoyable. And it was also a wonderful thing for me because what came out of it was I had a story published by Sing Fly in June 2016. So yeah, so I mean I would have got the train down, train back, and I always had books and laptop and all this work I was supposedly going to do, but my head was always just buzzing with whatever had been happening at the workshop, that I really did nothing really, I would just look out the window and think.
And John, likewise, the first person that you thank in your acknowledgements is a friend of yours for planting the seed of the book. And I just wonder, could you tell me a bit about how the book took shape? And did you think of it at the time as linked stories or as one big story?
Yeah, the seed was planted on a very wet March evening at a football match, in a National League match between Meath and Kildare in Navan. And my friend Richard Ball and myself were there. He was supporting Meath, I was supporting Kildare. It was a really appalling match. I can't even remember who won. But at one point during it, we were leaning on one of those metal barriers, and he said to me, "Did it ever cross your mind that the disciples may have taken Jesus at his word? And he said, 'Eat my body and drink my blood.'" It hadn't crossed my mind. So it sat there somewhere up here for about 5 years. And then I was working on a play which actually kind of bits and pieces of the first and last story were in the play. And we toured that and to tremendous success, and it was a joke. But there was enough stuff came out of the play to make me think actually that would make an interesting story, and thus I wrote the first story and the last story, which are both narrated by this guy called Peter. And then I thought actually it would be really interesting, and I had just moved into an apartment on my own in Athy, and it was overlooking a cemetery. It was a brilliant place to write. Extraordinary things happen in cemeteries at night, but that's by the way. I mean positive things as well as strange things. But so I spent 2.5 years working on that series of stories, and yeah, I knew that I wanted them to be linked. Yeah. Yes, and I wanted each to be narrated by a different character.
Because all of your stories are kind of set in Belfast, did you kind of think about links between the stories? Did you imagine these characters crossing over into each other's stories or crossing paths?
I suppose theoretically the people could have, because it's very, very circumscribed where they are. It's only a handful of streets that these people are operating within. So yeah, they probably could, in their little alternative world here, bump into each other, and one could hold the door open for another runner. That could happen, but it doesn't actually happen in any of the stories. I don't think I tried to do that at all, to try to tie them up like that.
I wanted to ask you both about religion and its influence in your writing. Wendy, you're about to read from a story called Last Supper, and you also have a story called To All Their Jews, which I think is a biblical reference as well. Of course, John, you have Sacred Heart, the Word. I just wonder if you could talk about how you engage with religion in your work, and what is it about that language that kind of compels you?
Right, well, in about 4 sentences, I was educated by the Redemptorists in Limerick. I'm an agnostic Quaker. I love the New Testament as a series of stories. I kind of hope there's something out there because I'd like to see my brother again. I don't think there is. But of course, when you're writing 12, 13 stories that are influenced by the New Testament, there's a huge, I had to read and reread and reread in order to find new ways of telling old stories and then to put new slants on them. But yeah, I'm intrigued by the New Testament. I read it all the time because I think it's just a fantastic series of stories, and I think Jesus must have been a really interesting man, with the emphasis on man. But beyond that, I don't know. Is there anything out there? Well, there are people. Yeah, that's me.
How about you, Wendy? How does the language kind of come into your work?
Well, in terms of where these stories are set, there must be within, and it's where I live as well, there must be within, a short distance of my house, I don't know, maybe about 10 different Protestant churches. And for somebody that's sort of, I grew up in the 1980s, it was just a thing you did, whether you're religious or not. You went to the youth club, you went to the church on a Sunday night or whatever, because it was just an activity where other people were. So I've got a couple of stories where religion plays quite a prominent role, but I suppose just generally I would be sort of a Hunter S. Thompson in religion, that it's a crazy, weird, cruel world, and if religion is what helps you get through it, then go for it. But his proviso was that you don't rip anybody off, and obviously that's a problem because so much of it seems to be about exploiting other people.
Maybe we could hear from the last supper.
Okay. Okay, this is from a story called Last Supper, and it's set in a cafe that is run by a church, and also as well it's run in collaboration with the mental health charity. So the people who are working in the cafe have various mental health problems. And there are 2 young people called Jake and Rebecca, and there are 2 older people then called Rosalie and JD. The young guy who's basically just trying to keep all of this under control, very decent guy, and he's called Andy. So really this is sex, mayhem, responsibility, impending chaos. That's what we've got here. Let's have some fun. So JD had started wiping everything down. Give it another 5 minutes, Andy says, and then turn the sign around. Only tables 5 and 6 are still occupied, and their people are bound to leave soon. Rosaline takes in the geraniums, the tables and chairs, and also the jester's sign. Keep a quick eye on things while I nip down the road, would you, Rosaline? Andy says. He wants to buy some tape and get that sofa sorted before the end of the day, because things can fall apart so quickly. Andy got the job at Jester's through the church. In those early days, he was there almost every other night at one thing or another, discussions and seminars, workshops and praise nights. That was when he was still full of the newfangledness of it all. One evening at a meeting, someone from the church had mentioned that they were looking for a person to work in their cafe in a supervisory capacity. Well, he'd nothing on at the moment. Would he be interested in doing something like that? Yes, but had he any experience? They needed someone who knew what they were doing. The upmarket Lebanese where Andy had been working, Biblos nights, had just closed down. People in Belfast, it seemed, needed Biblos nights as much as people in Biblos needed Belfast nights. It wasn't long before he found himself sitting in the office of the charity where he was required to have a short informal interview. On his way back to the cafe, Andy sees the door open as a young guy and girl leave. They're both laughing and they stop to look through the window of the cafe before moving off up the road. And then out dashes Rebecca. Hey, Andy shouts, Rebecca, what's up? When he goes inside, Rosaline is sitting at one of the tables with 2 women. That, JD says, is a job for you. What do you mean? You'll see. Andy, Rosaline says, would you come here a minute because I think you need to speak to these ladies here. JD winks. Good luck, he says. One of the women is sipping a glass of water while the other looks on solicitous.
Well, the woman says, you come to a place like this and that's not a sight that you expect to see. You think a place like this is going to be one thing and then it turns out to be something else. You think, her friend says, you think when you're doing your bit by coming to a place like this. Maybe you shouldn't, but you do. It's not like there's not loads of other places on the road that you couldn't go to, places coming down with coffee shops. Has there been a problem? Andy asks. There's been a problem, all right. People. The woman flutters her hand. People. It's not what I bargain on saying when I go out to a cafe, and certainly not a religious place like this is meant to be. This is meant to be a religious place, isn't it? Sorry, I'm not getting this, Andy says. Just as we're about to leave, she says, I thought I'll go to the toilet sure before we go, and when I open the door, what is it you think I see? Do you know what I see? 2 people in your toilet. They were having intercourse, her friend says. Do you know what I mean? No, says Andy. Really, in there? He looks in the direction of the only toilet in the place. Unisex, cramped, the tiny wash basin that gets hit by the door, the gooey soap and that toilet brush that still has the barcode on it. Logistically difficult enough, but maybe those 2 that he saw leaving managed it. Are you sure? He asks. Son, I'm sure, she says. Her friend says, they're doing that and then they're touching stuff like the sausage rolls. You know, and working with the food. Hold on, says Andy. You're not saying it was people working here? That's exactly what I'm saying, son, she says. Andy turns round to look at the counter where JD and Rosaline are standing watching. No, says the woman, not them, that's not who I mean, the young ones. They didn't even lock the door, says her friend. Imagine not even locking the door. You'd lock the door if you're even just going to the toilet. They didn't see me standing there, says the woman. They were both so involved in it. This is as Clare could make the papers. A solemn-faced photo of this woman with her hair just done, sitting in the safety of her living room, nursing a cup of tea that has been made in the non-sexual province of her own kitchen, and it would herald the end of the place. This shouldn't have happened, Andy says. Shock big time for you, and all I can say is that I am really sorry. He pauses. But what I'm asking you, and this is me really asking you a big favour, and know that, but could you just keep this to yourself? The people involved, they'll be totally dealt with. Trust me, this will not happen again, but could you just keep this between yourselves? Well, she says, the people involved will be dealt with and they'll never do it again. Well, I don't know, she says. Please, says Andy. Well, I'd rather just forget what I saw, she says. Sure, it's not like the people working here are right in the head, her friend says. Wouldn't that be the case? Well, Andy is about to contradict her, but he decides, no, it's not the usual type of place, he concedes. No, she says, sure, God help them. He gives them both loyalty cards and stamps them 7 times. That means that next time our coffees are free, the friend points out, and he gives them the first slices of the new pavlova to take away. I just love getting the first slice, the friend says. Do you not just love getting the first slice? When they're gone, Andy finds Jake out the back of the cafe smoking a cigarette. I can't believe this situation, says Andy. It's outrageous. It's a total disgrace. I mean, what were you thinking of? Jake stares at the ground. Could you not have waited till the end of the day? Would it have been beyond you to get a room somewhere? Could you not even have done it out in the alley? Sorry, says Jake. That conversation I've just had to have with those 2 women, says Andy. Sorry. Well, it's easy to say, isn't it? You're only sorry because you got caught. I see your partner in crime didn't hang around too long. He shrugs. Well, I don't need to tell you that you'll be cleaning the toilets tonight. He nods. Okay. I hope you realise this is actually a pretty big deal, Jake. It's not good. I know, he says. Are you going to tell Ronnie and Michelle? Andy's met Jake's foster parents once, grinning faces in a dirty old estate car, 3 other kids and 2 dogs in the back. Andy sighs. No, I'm probably not going to tell Ronnie and Michelle. They sanitise the surface, they steep the cups in the tannin solution. Andy rings off the till, X's and Z's it, checks the takings with a balance and sets up a new float, puts the money in the safe. The takings, such as they are. He lodges the invoices and Jake cleans the toilet. JD mops the floor, but he stops to lift up the duct tape Andy is left sitting on one of the tables. Here, he says, what do you wrap a hamster in so it doesn't explode when you shag it? Don't know, says Rosaline. Duct tape. How's that funny, says Rosaline. It's just not funny. Rosaline has made potato salad a couple of days ago. There's a vat of it. She looks at the use-by date. This is going to have to go in the bin, she says sadly. What a waste. Sure, give me a few good scoops of it and I'll take it home, JD says. But it's off, Rosaline says. Think the ones I live with will be noticing that? JD shared with an assortment of people a once grand and elegant house on the other side of town, long subdivided into little cold rooms. If you think they'll eat it, Rosaline says. Oh, they will, says JD. I'll probably end up eating it myself. Just don't like throwing stuff away, she says. The religious experience which had brought Andy to the church and then the cafe had happened on the second night of his brother's stag. The first night had involved dry ice shots which had made him puke luminous bile. On the second, although she was meant to be the highlight, he hadn't enjoyed the stripper. Andy had seen her sitting in the bar earlier on, talking to somebody, sad line of a mouth, eating crisps. Later on, when she'd appeared in the back room, he could see in the white light the indentations on her legs where her socks had been. The whole place was clapping and whooping, but he had gone back to the hotel room with the tiny kettle and the UHT sticks in an old ashtray. He lay on the bed watching the telly for a while. Some of the buttons were missing on the remote. Andy had looked in the embossed folder of services available at the hotel and saw that someone had drawn a dick on the writing paper. Who was ever going to write a letter in this place anyway? Might do for a suicide note, he supposed. Someone had also drawn 3 swastikas in the bottom left-hand corner. The folder said that the hotel had been a family concern for 25 years. Andy had looked in the bedside drawer and seen a tube of toothpaste and a sock with a few condoms stuffed inside it. Somebody had been feeling optimistic about this trip. And there was a small Gideon's Bible that was even more plastic than the hotel menu of services. The paper was almost translucent and the print minuscule. He had to peer to see it. Rocky Raccoon, he thought. Andy opened a couple of random pages and tried to remember what happened to Rocky Raccoon. Did he shoot somebody or did someone shoot him? And he didn't know if he'd been reading for 2 minutes or 2 hours because time seemed to stretch and bend and collapse, and fleeting things that he had never been able to articulate before started to take form in a way more substantial than words. When he looked at the ceiling of the shabby room, the damp patch over in the corner and the crack around the lighting surround, and the repeated crescent stains where someone had bounced a dirty ball in the ceiling, the fragility of it all was overwhelming, and the beauty too, because there was Marty's sweatshirt lying in illuminated folds like a sleeve from one of those old paintings, and there were the towels brilliant white on the floor. Centuries of people had cleaned away the dirt from sheets and towels, pummeling at the stains and the grime, rinsing it all away, the water circling down the drain and endless lines of washing, high in the sky, billowing in a hard wind. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Wendy, I love the way that you write about young people and sexuality in a way that, obviously in this story, to hilarious effect. You have another story called Observation, which is kind of a coming-of-age story of a teenage girl, and she's kind of discovering her sexuality, but she's also kind of looking outwards and figuring out how sexuality works in the world and how it can be leveraged and who has sexual currency and who doesn't. Just wondering, could you talk a bit about that story and how you came into that perspective?
Yeah, certainly. This story is about a girl who is really fascinated by what's happening in her friend's house. And I just love the whole idea of different people's homes anyway, and the kind of rules and regulations that are set up in these little microcosms. And basically what's happening is there's a mother, Kim Castles, and there is her daughter. And Kim Castle's boyfriend is also having a relationship with Kim Castle's daughter. And the daughter's friend, Lauren's friend, Kath, who's the person telling it from her perspective, she's fascinated by this. There's no judgment there. It's just an interesting thing to watch, to play out. And Kath really finds Kim Castle is the most interesting and the most attractive of any of the characters in the house, so that's a further dimension that complicates it.
And there's a kind of a coolness to the way she watches it all.
Yes.
She's not going to intervene as such, she's just going to let it.
She's just going to watch it.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Similarly, John, there's a kind of a Mary Magdalene figure in your book who has kind of a strange, intimate encounter with a stranger on the street, and afterwards she's exhilarated, and she kind of, there's a line that I love. She says, "It made me happy that I'd done something unsafe."
Yeah.
And I think in both of your books, it kind of strikes me that the characters are pursuing things that are unsafe and foolish, even to kind of feel more alive, I suppose.
Yeah, she's the only, well, she's not the only female character in the book, but she's the only female narrator in the book. There's a character in there called Jude, who has a falling out with the captain and who heads off to pursue the revolution elsewhere and is apparently blown up on a speedboat somewhere. And so she's telling his story, and she does tell that story of that incident in London. She's a photographer, and she talks about this incident where she met a homeless man. And I suppose all of the characters really, that was one of the things that really got to me when I thought about writing this as a full collection. That notion of people being out there on the front line of their own lives and having to take chances. And sometimes taking those chances and doing things that might be perceived to be unacceptable. And in the case of other characters, pulling back from those things. There's a great line, there's a song co-written by Leonard Cohen called Song of Bernadette. He has a great line in it where we fall, we fly, we mostly fall, we mostly run. It was one of those driving forces behind this book, that notion of that sometimes people try to fly and sometimes they just run away from the possibilities of flight. And of course that's probably where literature is at its best. It's on that uncertain line between deciding and not deciding. So yeah, it was very much there with all of the characters.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask you both about place in your writing. Wendy, your stories are set in Belfast, obviously, and what was important to you to convey about the place? And can you write about it when you're there, or do you need a bit of distance?
Oh, I'm never away from it. I never go anywhere. I hardly leave the house. Well, I'll go to the co-op, but I don't go many other places. I know that's true. I don't go many other places at all. So I just sit in the kitchen and write away. Yes.
You're in the midst of it.
I'm in the midst of it. Yes, absolutely. But I mean, having said that, I know I'm working particularly in this book. It's a very, very tight locale, or very tight milieu. But I would honestly say that I don't think that these are stories that are necessarily only about creating the sort of hyper social realist way lives of people in a very particular environment. I mean, hopefully it's beyond that, and it's the sort of issues, feelings that are fairly, it's really grandiose to say, universal or timeless or whatever, but that's what it is, loneliness, feeling periphery, missed opportunities, the kind of things that you're talking about there as well, John. It's all those sorts of ideas, but in a very, very specific, very tight locale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And John, you're about to read from the title story of your book, which Peter is exiled in this beach town. And it's this very strange, liminal kind of place. And I noticed throughout the book, there are definite locations, but they all seem to kind of shift and overlap in a way that, I don't know.
Yeah, I wanted to, because it's only the second book of the 19, I think everything else has been, with the exception of Clare, which was a novel by the English poet John Clare, everything else, I think, virtually everything I've written has been set in kind of a triangle of South Kildare, Carlow, which is the area I grew up in. It's funny because a lot of people have assumed when they've read the book that it's set in America, a lot of it because of the desert, but it's not. Actually, some parts of it are set in America. But yeah, I love landscape, and I think the landscape is a huge part of anything you've ever written. I wanted the landscape to be specific, and yet at the same time I wanted these guys scattered across the world from wherever it was that the original events took place. So yeah, I was conscious of having a kind of landscape in each story, but not specifying necessarily, with one or two exceptions, where that landscape was. Yeah, but the desert features greatly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we hear
right, sure, okay, thank you. Thanks. Yeah, this is from the first. There are two stories in the book which are called Once We Sang Like Other Men, the first and last story. And this is from the first story. It's narrated by this guy Peter. And it's based, you'll recognise it immediately. I've always been fascinated by the character of Lazarus. He died, he was resurrected, and we never heard about him again. So I wondered what happened to him afterwards, and maybe this is an explanation. But this is Peter telling the story. The first time I remember hearing of Laz, he was supposed to be dead. It was just before the captain hit the headlines. We were 60 or 70 miles from the town where Laz and his sisters lived. The sisters had been to a few of the captain's rallies. I think he knew them from way back. Only afterwards did I realise that they wanted to be on the road with him. They wanted to be at the heart of it all, but of course they weren't. They were like so many other hangers-on, looking for approval by association. At least no one could say that of me. Anyway, we got the call and set off in the pickup, the captain and Katie and me. I was driving. I was always driving. All I remember of the journey is the dirt road and the captain urging me to get there as fast as I could. I'm pushing this heap of shit to the limit, I said. I can't go any faster. If we hit a hump, it'll rip off the exhaust. Just do your best, he said. Typical. He'd never say, come on, put your bloody boot down. It was, do your best, do whatever you can do. And the words were always spoken very calmly. Sometimes I wanted to hit him when he did that. I'd feel I was being manipulated. But mostly I just made the extra effort because I wanted to do what I felt he needed doing. So there we were, the three of us on this twisting road, in a pickup with a dodgy fourth and heat like hell. And I knew the captain wanted to get there as quickly as possible. I could feel the electricity coming off him. And occasionally, when I'd catch his reflection in the rear view mirror, I'd catch those blue eyes staring straight ahead, as if he were willing us to be there more quickly than was possible. The flies are what I remember about the little back bedroom in the house. That and the smell of burning joss sticks, put there to drown the other smells of shit and piss and decomposition. But all the two sisters seemed interested in was the captain. It was like he'd come there for a party or to a dinner or something. It wasn't like their brother had died. I don't think they'd even have been worried had the captain not gone in to see Laz's body. They made coffee for us and they wanted us to eat after the long journey. There was plenty of food. This was, after all, a wake. They talked to the captain all the time. They talked to me some of the time. They ignored Katie as though she had no right to be there. Or perhaps they were jealous of her, I don't know. I was never quite clear about what exactly happened in that room. There was no proper explanation from the captain. Katie and myself were out in the laneway that ran behind the little row of houses that made up the street where Laz and his sisters lived. It was hot and humid in the house, and we'd just been sitting in the pickup cab for the guts of 2 hours. We wanted air and shelter from the sun and to be well away from this pair of intense and peculiar women. We heard the noise long before we knew its cause. At first I thought someone else had died. Over the years I've seen that happen at funerals and weddings and wakes, and at the captain's meetings. Someone becomes overwrought, someone says something that dredges stuff up, someone with a leaky ticker keels over. It happens. And I thought it had happened again. That was my first thought. But there was something about the way people were running in and out through the back gate, calling neighbours from down the lane. Something about the tone of their voices. Hysteria tempered with awe. Another thing I'd learned over the years was how to read the mood of a crowd. It's something I needed to know once our meetings began to get bigger and were infiltrated by shit stirrers. Half a dozen troublemakers can do a lot of damage if they swing a crowd. And alternatively, they sometimes need rescuing if they misread the moment. Obviously, we didn't want, and equally, we couldn't afford to have someone lynched at one of our meetings. Anyway, there was something about those sounds, something about the way people wanted to be close to the wake house and at the same time wanted others to experience whatever it was they were experiencing. So I pushed my way through the garden gate. It was like a circus in the courtyard. People throwing themselves on the ground and tearing their hair and praising God and screaming incoherently. I never had much time for that kind of thing, and neither, I know, did the captain. But, as I say, I have no idea what happened in that little room in that cramped house. I don't know if Laz was really dead. It's unlikely. I suspect he was in a coma, and by chance, or the captain's willpower, he came back from that state to a state of relative vigour.
which isn't hard when everyone has you slated as dead. By the time I got inside, Laz was sitting in a chair in the kitchen, looking like death warmed up, but obviously breathing. People were giving him a wide berth, but they were crowding around the captain, wanting to touch him and to be touched by him. More of that fame by association stuff. It was after midnight before I managed to edge the pickup down the lane behind the house and get Katie and the captain out of there. People were still crowding through the front door, not really knowing what they wanted, but wanting it anyway. The last thing I saw through the open kitchen window was Laz, still sitting in his chair, still looking like dried puke. We were driving the desolate, arid road 20 miles out of that town. A full moon saturating the yellow desert to our right and left, Katie and the captain and me. And he had this serene look that always shrouded him after something significant had happened. Katie was sitting between us. The radio was playing very low. Crystal Gale was singing Crying in the Rain or something like that. A song that was oozing heartbreak. No one was really listening to the music and no one was saying anything. Just this low weeping melody and the steady murmur of the engine. And even that seemed to be running lower than usual. It was like the moonlight had damped everything down, making us afraid to speak. And then somewhere in the middle of nowhere, the captain asked me to pull over the pickup. He got out and walked 50 yards through the rubbish-strewn sand at the roadside, out to where the ground was softer and cleaner. I followed. Behind me I could hear the whispering music and I knew Katie was sitting on the step of the pickup smoking. I could smell the sweet tobacco in the heavy night air. I caught up with the captain and we walked together in silence. And then he stopped and stood looking back the way we'd come. I knew he was thinking about what had happened. It'll change things, won't it? I asked. He nodded. This was the big one. He nodded again. There's no turning back now, he said. No going back. We both knew it. And that was the last totally quiet time we had, standing out there in the desert under a big blue moon. Two men looking at the sky, the night air warm and calm, the smell of cigarette smoke. Two men listening to the silence, and behind them, a woman sitting on the step of a pickup, watching. It was 18 months later, weeks after the captain's death, that I found myself back driving that same road, this time on my own. I decided on an impulse to swing by the town where Laz and his sisters lived. It wasn't hard to find their house, not in the 5-street, one-river assortment that was their dark little community. Laz wasn't doing well. I found him in a wheelchair outside his front door. His skin was still the same colour, sickly, but he looked a lot grubbier and more than 18 months older. He had a begging bowl beside him, and round his neck someone had hung a cardboard sign that read, "Where there's life, keep life." I parked up the street and walked back past him. He didn't even raise his head, didn't acknowledge me. He didn't even seem to be awake. Martha, his older sister, was inside the house. The other sister was nowhere to be seen. All she could talk about was how Laz hadn't really appreciated the second chance, how he'd been drinking too much and had fallen and broken his hip, how he didn't seem to have any real gratitude for the chance he'd been given, and how anyone else would have taken the opportunity to make something of themselves. I'm not an impulsive person. Twice in my life I've done impulsive things. The first time was when I packed a bag, walked out on my wife and kids, left my job and hit the road to follow the captain. The second time was that day. I manhandled Laz into the pickup cab, hoisted his wheelchair onto the back, propped the cardboard sign on the windowsill of his sister's house, and drove away through the pouring rain. He still had a reasonable facility with words back then on good days. "Thank you," he said. I could barely understand him. At first I thought he'd had a stroke, but then I realised that his teeth had all been broken. "That's okay. What happened to your teeth?" I asked, expecting him to tell me that he'd fallen and smashed them. "Sisters," he said. "Sorry?" "Broke them." "What are you talking about?" "More money." "You're telling me your sisters broke your teeth so you could get more money?" He nodded. There were tears in his eyes. I never saw them cry again. We stayed in a cheap hotel that night, and I rang Martha and told her Laz was with me. How are we supposed to live, she asked. I said nothing. Laz was my life, she said. I looked at him sitting in the bath in our hotel room covered in sores. Get a fucking job, I said, and I hung up. And 3 weeks later, having wandered in and out of towns and villages along the coast, we ended up here. Thank you.
One of my favourite aspects of that story is the reframing of Mary and Martha as these villains and almost these like obsessed fans of the captain.
Yeah.
And I sense that you had a lot of fun upending those kind of biblical
I
tropes.
did, yeah. I did. There's a kind of a companion piece, a novel called Joseph, and I had great fun with Mary, the Blessed Virgin. She doesn't come out with two lads. She's very snobby and obsessed with getting her son into a boarding school, and his father wants him to go to the tech. But anyway, but yes, I did have a bit of fun with that, yeah. And it was lovely to have the frameworks of characters like Martha, Mary, Laz, but just the framework, and you got to fill in the details yourself, which is always lovely as a writer. You know, if you have bits and pieces, but there are gaps, which are always the bits that are best.
I wanted to ask you both about jobs. I know there's not a lot of full-time fiction writers in the world, you know, and most of the writers I know, they teach or they freelance or they have some kind of other thing going on, and I wondered, could you talk about how that relates to your own lives, and how do those other roles support the work and how do they frustrate the work?
Okay. Yeah, I work full-time as a teacher in a secondary school, and I'm also a mother of 2 kids. I've got a partner, husband as well. And so yeah, so those things, obviously a lot of time is devoted to those things too. But I've just been reasonably disciplined, you know, when I was trying to do this, that get the tea dishes cleared up and then start working, or else get up quite early to work. But it's probably frustrating, it's probably annoying, because even if I'm not writing, I've probably been thinking about these stories maybe about 70-80% of the time, and I know people have been speaking to me, and the whole time I'm just thinking, yeah, how am I going to get that person to move into that room, or, you know, I'll just be trying to reframe a sentence or whatever, how somebody might say it. So that's probably frustrating for the people that live with me. But it'll be very good, very understanding. Yeah.
And do you have a particular place where you work, or is it just kind of wherever you can grab a bit of space and time?
Normally in the kitchen table, just leaning against the radiator. Yeah, that's what I think.
About yourself, John?
Yeah, I left RTE after 23 years in 2002 to write full-time, and I'm back teaching in Maynooth now to tell you how successful the full-time writing was. But I'm also involved, I suppose I'm blessed in the sense that I do part-time teaching there and in the Irish Writers' Centre, and I'm involved in a theatre company, and so it tends to alternate between a book and a play. And you know, there's the whole social interaction of working with actors and directors and whatever else when you're working on a play, which is wonderful. And then by the time the play has finished touring, you're kind of glad to get back to the solitude. And since I inherited 2 teenagers a few years ago, 2 teenage girls, I had forgotten what it was like. But anyway, they're both away in college, actually, one of them here in Cork, studying music. And so I've also come into a room since they moved out, so which is grand, yeah.
Sorry, I would say that sometimes people have said to me about working in a school that I'm sure the kids are absolutely thrilled to hear about your success. I have to say, absolutely zero interest. And, you know, why should they? They're teenagers, and they're 50-year-old teachers. Short stories are neither here nor there for them. So,
that's for sure.
Yeah.
Even people who live in the house with you.
Exactly.
One thing I'm always interested in is writers' favourite writers. So are there any writers that you just constantly go back to, whether for comfort or inspiration or both?
Whenever I'm working on a book, I don't read any prose, so I constantly go back to Raymond Carver's poems, which I think each and every one of his poems is a brilliant short story. And I constantly go back to Leonard Cohen, not just his music, but his writing. And he has a new book out this week, posthumously, obviously. But yeah, those are, and D.H. Lawrence, but those are the three who keep me going. All of whom are dead, it just strikes me now. Anyway, there you go.
As you know.
I have two books that I read every year, we reread them, and they would be Molly King, Good Behaviour, and also Ian Hunter, Diary of a Rock and Roll Star from What the Hippo, but they don't help me with this at all. It's just very enjoyable to reread them. Chekhov, I never go on holiday without, I've got all different Chekhov collections, but always take Chekhov short stories. Yeah.
And would you feel like, John, if you're writing prose, you find it hard to read prose at the same time, or?
No, I'm okay. In that respect, the others are not okay. But in that respect, fine. Yes.
Great. I think we have time for a few audience questions. If anybody has one. That's hard
Thank God for that.
Come on, Danny.
The captain, the term the captain.
Is that Danny Denton?
It is.
How are you? Long time no see. How are you?
I'm good. I'll come sit on The captain term, it kind of has like nautical connotations. It also has sporting connotations, especially for Gaelic people. Were you wandering around for long before you came upon that he's going to be called captain?
I was, and I will confess, I stole it from a Leonard Cohen song, where he talks about the captain. It's a song about many things, but it's also about the whole 7-Day War, etc., etc. But I was floundering and trying to find a title that would kind of say somebody in control, but wouldn't say Jesus. And I always have music on when I'm writing, and I suddenly heard it. I thought, yeah, that's it, I'll steal that. So that's where it came from. Yeah.
Can I just ask Wendy about, my favourite story in the book was 77 Pop Facts Didn't Know About Peter Courtney. Can I ask you about the structure of that, the number of paragraphs?
Yes.
It's very unusual, and it took about 4 or 5 paragraphs to get into it. But then you're kind of stuck forward with the numbers, and you want to get to 77. But then it's kind of an excellent story, and the ending, the downbeat nature of the ending is kind of what hits you. And what was the story behind the structure of that? Is it actually based on?
No, right. This is. I'm glad that you like that story. Thank you. Yes, this isn't based on anybody whatsoever, but it's a sort of a fake, sort of like rock and roll casualty, a sort of like a made-up pop star. But what I've tried to do is weave into it quite a few things that did happen to various different people, and even the name Gil Courtney. People go, I've heard of him. Think I've heard of him, and it's because it's Dizzy Gillespie, Bobby Gillespie, Courtney Barnum, Courtney Love. I picked names that I thought would have resonances for people. But really, I'd written that story a number of times, and it actually had been quite a long story. It had been maybe about 15,000 words or so, and I knew that I wanted to write about something like that, but I couldn't get it worked out. And I wrote it from the mother's point of view, or from his point of view. I wrote it even from a burglar's point of view. At one point, I thought that might work. Nothing worked. And then I was speaking to Sean Riley, and we were talking about form and content and relationship between them. And we're thinking about ways in which you read about pop music. If you're not going to sit down and read, Greil Marcus or something, what other ways do you actually find out about music? And thought about those lists that you used to get and smash hits and things. And so I just took the material and put it into the facts, but shuffled them around a lot as well, because when it was strictly chronological, it was actually quite dull, really. But then if it's messed about too much, people might find it too confusing and might find it just too sort of disparate or whatever. So that was the structure. That was the structure there, trying to get the form of it to suit the subject matter. What I was trying to do there, I suppose, as well, was actually make a really sort of quite serious point about the nature of art, or the nature of people producing things that maybe get very small audiences or no audiences whatsoever, and if that's actually still a valid thing to do, because other people think of Gil Courtney as like, well, he should have worked in Mackey's, he should have got a job in the shipyard, what a waste of time. But is it worth it, even if it's just one person from Leeds who liked your stuff but didn't even make it to a student documentary? Thank you.